You're standing in your kitchen. The fridge is humming away in the corner. The power bill is sitting on the bench, and it has crept up again. You open that door, you feel the cold air roll out, and you tell yourself this is the only way to keep food from going off. It isn't. For nearly 100 years, Australians kept meat, milk, and butter fresh in 40-degree heat with no electricity at all. The whole trick cost about $1 to build, and I can show you exactly how it worked. I'm not talking about some fancy gadget. I'm talking about a bush method born on the goldfields of Western Australia in the 1890s, kept alive by station wives and country families for generations, then quietly shoved into a cupboard the moment the power companies had us hooked. There's a name, a place, and a date behind all of it, and by the end of this I'll hand you the exact piece of buried research that made it click for me. And before you think this is only for people with a farm and a paddock, let me stop you right there. I live in an ordinary house. You can do this in a flat, in a unit, in a small kitchen. No land needed. I remember the first time I saw one. I was up past Coolgardie, sitting on the back step of an old fella's place, while the afternoon sun turned everything to shimmer, and he pointed at this timber box hanging in the breezeway. He said, "That kept my grandmother's butter hard as a rock, through summers hotter than this." I laughed. I honestly thought he was pulling my leg. I had spent my whole life believing that cold meant a compressor, a plug, and a bill. That afternoon started to unravel everything I thought I knew. Because here's what I didn't understand back then. That timber box had a name. It was called a Coolgardie safe. And the man who first built one was a contractor named Arthur Patrick McCormick, working the goldfields around the town of Coolgardie in Western Australia in the 1890s. Now picture that place at that time. Gold had been struck, thousands of men poured in, and there was almost no water, no ice, and certainly no electricity. Meat would turn green in a day. Butter became oil. Men were getting sick from food that had spoiled in the heat. McCormick noticed something simple. He had a wet bag hanging over a bottle of water, and he saw that as the wind blew and the water in the bag evaporated, the bottle underneath stayed cool. Cooler than the air around it. So he took that idea and he built a box. A wooden frame, sides covered in wet hessian, a tray of water sitting up top, and strips of cloth or flannel dipping into that water so it slowly wicketed down and kept the hessian damp all day long. He stood the legs in little dishes of water so the ants couldn't climb up. Then he hung it where the breeze could get to it. And it worked. It worked so well that within a few short years, nearly every household on the goldfields had one. From there it spread right across the country. By the early 1900s, the Coolgardie safe was standard kit in Australian homes, from the outback to the coast. Farmhouses had them. Workers' cottages had them. It was, for a time, the most common way an Australian family kept their food from rotting, and it cost next to nothing to make. Now here's where I want you to feel what I felt. I sat there thinking, if this thing was in nearly every home in the country, if it fed families through the worst heat this continent can throw at us, then why had I never seen one until I was a grown man? Why did nobody teach me this? I had spent thousands of dollars over the years on fridges, on the power to run them, on replacing food that spoiled the moment the electricity blinked out in a storm. And the answer to all of it was hanging in an old man's breezeway, built from timber offcuts and a wet sack. But understanding why it disappeared, that's where this story turns dark. Because it didn't vanish because it stopped working. It vanished because someone had a very good reason to make sure you forgot it. Let me explain what actually happened. When mains electricity started reaching into Australian homes through the 1920s and 1930s, the companies selling it needed you to use more of it. A house with a Coolgardie safe in the breezeway used almost none. So the electric refrigerator got pushed hard. And I mean hard. It was sold as modern, it was sold as clean, it was sold as the thing that separated a respectable modern home from a backward one. The message, dripped out year after year, was simple. The old way is dirty. The old way is for people who can't afford better. Throw it out. And people did. They threw out the very thing that had kept their grandparents fed through droughts and heat waves. They swapped a $1 box for a machine that demanded a payment every single month for the rest of their lives. Nobody framed it as a trap, they framed it as progress. But look at what you're left holding. A fridge that stops the second the power goes out. A bill that never stops climbing. A quiet, total dependence on a system that decides the price and knows you have no other option. I'm not telling you to throw out your fridge. I still use mine. But I want you to see the con for what it was. You were sold the idea that you had no choice. That cold food required a company, a cord, and a monthly fee. And that's simply not true, and it never was. The evidence that it was never true was preserved by the very people the modern world laughed at. The countrywomen, the station families, the old-timers who never quite trusted a system they didn't control. So the question that gnawed at me next was the obvious one. Does it actually work well enough to matter, or is it just a nice bit of nostalgia, a museum piece for the tourists? Because a few degrees cooler in a heat wave means nothing if your milk still turns. I needed real numbers, and that's when I stopped listening to stories and went looking for the science. What I found genuinely surprised me. The principle behind the Coolgardie safe is called evaporative cooling, and it isn't folklore, it's physics. When water changes from a liquid into a vapor, it has to pull energy out of its surroundings to do it. That energy is heat. So as the water in that wet Hessian evaporates into the passing air, it drags the heat out of the box and carries it away. The drier the air, and the stronger the breeze, the harder that pull becomes. And most of Australia, for most of the year, is exactly that. Hot and dry. It's as if this continent was built for the trick. The numbers people have measured are the part that stopped me cold. A well-made evaporative cooler working in dry heat can hold its inside temperature something like 10 to 15 degrees below the air outside. Think about what that means on a real day. It's 38 degrees outside. Inside that little box, it's sitting down around 23 or 24. That's the difference between butter that's hard and butter that's a puddle. Between milk that lasts and milk that curdles by lunchtime. Between meat that keeps a day or two and meat you have to throw in the bin. Our own national science body, the CSIRO, has spent decades studying evaporative cooling because the same principle runs those big cooling units you see bolted to rooftops all across the dry inland. Whole towns in the outback stay livable in summer on evaporative cooling that uses a fraction of the power of refrigerated air conditioning. It's the same physics that McCormick stumbled onto with a wet bag on the goldfields. The difference is only scale. One cools a bottle of milk, the other cools a house. Same idea, same continent, same reason it works so beautifully here. And that's when the size of what we'd lost really hit me. This wasn't a quaint old trick that happened to work a little bit. This was a serious, measurable, proven method of keeping food safe, running on nothing but water and moving air, in the exact climate we live in. The people who used it weren't making do. They were doing something clever. Cleverer, in some ways, than what most of us do today, because they weren't handing over a slice of their income every month for the privilege. But knowing the physics only got me halfway. Because I could feel the doubt building in you right now, the same doubt I had. This is all well and good if you've got a breezeway and a bit of yard and a country house with the wind whistling through. What about the rest of us? What about you, sitting in a unit, or a townhouse, or a small brick place on a suburban block where the air barely moves? Does any of this actually help someone living an ordinary modern life, in the home they've already got, with no shed full of timber and no acreage? I want to talk straight to you for a minute, because this next part is the part I built for you specifically. The one in the flat, the one who thinks the old bush stuff is lovely but not for your situation. You are exactly who needs to hear this, because the principle doesn't care how big your place is. It only cares about two things: water evaporating and air moving past it. And you can create both of those inside any home in this country, today, with things you already own. Here's the simplest version, and it costs you nothing. Take a clean tea towel or a pillowcase. Get it properly wet, then wring it out so it's damp, not dripping. Now sit your bottle of milk or your butter or that container of leftovers on a plate and drape the damp cloth right over it so the edges hang down and touch the plate. Put it somewhere the air moves, near an open window, in front of a fan, in a doorway where the breeze crosses. As that cloth dries, it pulls heat straight out of whatever is underneath it. Re-wet it when it dries out. That's it. That's the whole thing your great-grandmother knew. On a hot afternoon with the power out, that damp cloth is the difference between saving your food and losing it. Want to go one step better and make yourself a proper little cooler for a few dollars? Get 2 terracotta pots, one that fits inside the other with a gap between them. Plug the drainage hole in the bottom one. Fill that gap between the 2 pots with sand and soak the sand with water until it's saturated. Put your food inside the smaller pot and cover the top with a wet cloth. As the water evaporates out through the porous clay, the inside stays cool for hours, even a day. Country folk and desert people all over the world work this out independently, because the physics is the same everywhere the air is dry. You can sit that on a bench top in the smallest kitchen in the country. No power, no cord, no bill. And here's the part that matters most for you in a modern home. You can use this exact same principle to cool yourself, not just your food. On a scorching night, hang a damp sheet across an open window where even the faintest breeze comes through. The air that passes through that wet sheet comes out the other side cooler. Bushworkers, shearers, families in tin-roofed cottages all did this long before air conditioning existed. A wet sheet and an open window drop the temperature of a sleeping room enough to actually get some rest. Try it on the next hot night. You'll feel the difference on your skin the moment the air comes through. So now you can't tell yourself this is only for people with land. It isn't. It's for anyone with a tap and a bit of moving air, which is every single one of us. The barrier was never your house. The barrier was that nobody told you, because there's no monthly bill in a wet tea towel. Think about that damp cloth you could drape over your milk tonight. It works, but you're doing it half blind, piecing it together from one video, wondering what else those old columns knew that never made it to you. That's exactly why I put everything I've dug up into a set of books. There's Aussie Basics, which walks you through building that Coolgardie safe tonight from things already in your kitchen, and setting up a pantry so eggs and butter stop spoiling before you use them. There's Deep Thrift, showing you how to preserve a glut of eggs, meat, and vegetables with no freezer and no fancy gear. And there's the Full System, a complete 30-day plan that ties food keeping, cooking, and heating into one simple household routine, with printable templates you can stick on the fridge. Here's the free test you can run tonight, and you don't need to buy a thing to do it. Wet a tea towel, wring it damp, drape it over a bottle of milk on a plate near an open window, and feel that bottle in the morning. That's the whole principle proving itself in your own kitchen. If it works with a tea towel, imagine what the full method does. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description, or the pinned comment. And this matters right now, because that fridge is drawing power and climbing the bill every single hour you leave it as your only option. Now let me hand you the one piece of buried research I promised, because it's the detail that turns a nice trick into something you'll actually trust with your family's food. Now I promised you at the start that I'd hand you the one piece of buried research that pulled this whole thing together for me, and I always keep my word. This is the part I want you to lean in for, because it's the detail that turns a nice trick into something you'll actually trust with your family's food. For a long time I had a problem with the Coolgardie safe, even after I understood the physics. My problem was this. If you just build a box and wet the sides, you get a bit of cooling, sure, but it's patchy. Some days it works a treat. Some days it barely does anything. And I couldn't work out why the old-timers seemed to get such reliable results when my early attempts were hit and miss. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong, Or maybe the stories had been exaggerated over the years, the way stories are. The answer came out of the old records, and it was almost embarrassingly simple. I went digging through the digitized colonial newspapers on Trove, the National Library's archive, reading the household columns and the advice pages from the early 1900s, the ones written for goldfields and station families. And buried in that old advice, repeated again and again by people who actually lived on these things, was the one detail the modern museum descriptions leave out. It's not enough for the hessian to be wet. The wicking has to be constant, and the flow of water has to never ever stop, day or night. That's why they ran those strips of flannel or cloth from the water tray on top, all the way down the sides. Not for decoration. Those wicks were a pump with no moving parts. They kept every inch of that hessian soaked around the clock, even while the family slept, even when nobody was there to splash more water on. The cooling only works while the water is actively evaporating. The second the cloth dries out, the cooling stops, and the inside warms straight back up. The old-timers understood, in a way I hadn't, that the machine was the movement of the water, not the box itself. And here is the specific piece that I've never seen in a single modern guide, the thing those old household columns knew that we forgot. They wrote that you should stand the whole safe in a shaded spot but position it to catch a cross breeze, and crucially, that you must keep the top tray topped up so the wicks never run dry, because a safe that dries out at 2 in the afternoon has failed you at the exact hour you needed it most. They even recommended a double layer of hessian on the windward side, the side the breeze hits, so there was more wet surface for the air to pull through. 2 layers of wet cloth facing the wind. That was the secret to the reliable, deep cooling that kept a Goldfields family's meat safe in a summer that would kill you. When I read that, I went straight out and rebuilt mine the way the old columns described. Double hessian on the breeze side, proper wicks running from a tray I kept full, standing in the shade in the path of the afternoon breeze, and the difference was night and day. Suddenly it held that deep, steady cool, hour after hour, exactly the way the old fella near Coolgardie told me his grandmother's had. I'd had the box right all along. What I'd been missing was the knowledge that never made it into the modern write-ups, the knowledge that only survived because ordinary families wrote it down for each other in newspaper columns over 100 years ago. That's the hero of this whole story, if you think about it. Not a company, not an inventor with a patent, just ordinary Australians, mostly women running households in brutal conditions, who worked out something clever and passed it hand to hand, column to column, mother to daughter, so it wouldn't be lost. It nearly was lost anyway. It got buried under decades of advertising telling us the old way was shameful. But it survived, in the archives, in the memories of a few old-timers, and now it's survived all the way to you. So this weekend, you can do this. If you've got the space, build the box the proper way. Double hessian on the windward side, wicks running from a full top tray, standing in the shade in the breeze. If you're in a flat, start with the damp cloth over a plate, or the 2-pot cooler with wet sand between them. Either way, you'll be doing the exact thing that kept this country's families fed through heat that would spoil food in hours, using nothing but water and moving air, and keeping every dollar that would otherwise have gone to a machine that never stops asking for more. Here's what I really want you to take away from all this. You were told a lie by people who profited from your believing it. You were told that keeping your food safe, keeping yourself cool, keeping your family comfortable, all of it required a machine, a cord, and a bill that only ever goes one direction. And a contractor on the Coolgardie goldfields in the 1890s proved, with a wet bag and a wooden box, that it simply wasn't so. Tonight, when your fridge kicks in and the meter ticks over, you'll know something most people around you have completely forgotten. That's not a small thing. That's a piece of your independence handed back to you. You're the kind of person who feels in your gut that plain, useful, practical knowledge has been pushed aside on purpose, not because it stopped working, but because there was no profit in you knowing it. And you're right to feel that. Every time you re-wet that cloth, every time you top up that little tray, you're proving that the people who wrote us off as helpless were wrong. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this. Did anyone in your family ever have a Coolgardie safe, or one of those canvas water bags hanging off the front of the car to keep the drinking water cool on a long drive? Do you remember it working? Tell me down in the comments, and tell me which state or town you're watching from, because I read every one of these, and I love knowing where across this country you all are. Say it plainly so I can find it. And if you believe this old know-how deserves to be dug back up and kept alive instead of left to rot in an archive, then come along with the rest of us who are doing exactly that, one buried method at a time. There's a whole generation of practical Australian genius that got laughed out of our kitchens, and I'm bringing it back piece by piece. The next one I've been digging into might be the best yet. It's an old bush way of keeping bread and flour fresh for months, without a freezer and without it going rancid or getting weevils, a method the settlers relied on before a shop was ever within reach. Once you see how simple it is, you'll wonder, like I did, how on earth we ever let ourselves forget it. Now this video showed you what but inside the Bush Wisdom Circle, I hand you the complete build, every material and measurement, so you can make one yourself this week. And if you get stuck, ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time